Welcome back to the channel. It's no secret that the Murci is one of my favorite rides, and in the process of working on it, as most of you know, I changed the front to the SV nose that my friend Alex from SP Engineering set me up with. All prepreg carbon fiber, and it was very light. Then I decided to convert to rear-wheel drive, which took out the front differential and the axles and saved even more weight. This is where a little problem arose, and that is that the front slowly started going higher and higher. I haven't really addressed it because I haven't had time. However, it is quite troublesome when I see it all the time. So what I need to do is I need to lower the car and get it realigned, and the timing is good because actually the rear tires are wearing quite a bit on the inner edge, like it has some negative camber issues. It's been like that for a real long time before I did the conversion. So I was in need of alignment, but with all the other projects, just never got to it. You can kind of see here what I'm talking about. Luckily, the Murci is so crazy looking that no one really ever picked up on the fact that I've got 3.5 to 4 fingers worth of gap in the front, and that is a lot of gap, not only for this car, but many other things in life. Then if you look at the rear, it actually wasn't too bad, but if I was going to be in there, I figured I might as well square everything up because the whole car is getting aligned anyway. This way I can make it look as good as possible. It is a very good idea to measure everything out before you go up in the air and unload the suspension, because if you come back down again, as all of you know, once it's loaded, you won't be able to get accurate measurements. So there are a couple ways that I'll usually handle that. One is you could use the ground, but you want to make sure that everything's very level. So typically I won't do it that way anymore. What I'll typically do is take a measurement from the edge of the rim lip to the fender. Hit all 4 corners, and that way when there's a discrepancy, like let's say in the front of a 1/16 of an inch, you can adjust your calculations in coming down with the adjuster. Currently, as the Murci sits now, the passenger side front is about a 1/16 of an inch up over the driver, and the passenger side rear is about an 1/8 inch up over the driver. Therefore, I'll probably put 1 extra turn on the back and a 1/2 turn on the front, just to try and get it all leveled out. All right, I was getting ready to do the front, have the wheel off, and then there's always some sort of odd things that pop up, especially in all these cars, and tools. Every car always seems to need some sort of special tool, and the Murci is no different. Typically, a regular spanner wrench will do the job, undoing the lock collar and then adjusting the level with the perch. The problem with the Murci is the sleeve with the threads actually moves when I try and adjust the perch. This uses a pin spanner wrench, and typically those are for hydraulics. I don't have a whole lot of those, and the ones I have are more for bearing seals and stuff, so they're not actually in the shape of the spanner wrench. Therefore, I will have to buy one. So I would highly advise, if you're going to mess with the Murci, get it before you do it. I measure the hole out at 6mm, or for those of us that can't get metric, US is a lot easier. I'll probably use 1/4 inch and then just go ahead and sand it down so it's a nice snug fit. But something to keep in mind. So as far as the front right now, I'll be on hold for a bit. Now moving to the back, pretty straightforward. Well, okay, my best buddy, at least at this current moment in time, is the rotary lift, which helped me get the rear wheel off, which is quite heavy, I might add. In the back, the one thing that's different on the Murci is 2 shocks. In fact, to my knowledge, this is the only car I have with 2 shocks in the rear. So what does that mean? Double trouble. I just have to adjust both of them. But the good thing is on the rear, the threads to adjust are in the body of the shock. So we'll go ahead and pull down the lock and see if we can lower that perch to get the car to come down. If you can position the spanner wrenches as a grip to squeeze them together, hopefully you won't have to use a cheater bar or anything. It makes life a lot easier. Once everything's broken loose, then spin the lock down. Use a single spanner to bring the perch down to adjust your ride height. Good shot right there of the threads in the body of the shock, making life very easy. Then of course double up to tighten it back down. I have a lot of adjustable spanners, but they're too wide. They wouldn't fit in there, and these work really good, and they were not that expensive. I was able to pull them off of Amazon, and they did the job just fine. All right, I've got the rear wheels back on, and now we're down below back on lumber. So, a lot of people ask me, why don't I lower all my cars? Well, there's an answer to that. I don't like lowering cars. if I have to actually change the springs, then I'm really not liking lowering cars. But even on all these cars with Clover adjustables, it's not my most favorite thing. And the reason why is because it's just so insanely time consuming. The way that I usually do it is I'll make my adjustment, I'll lower it off the lift, I'll go and push it around the shop, then drive it once I know clearance is good, measure out again, then come back. And usually, if I'm lucky, I can hit it in 2 or 3 times. But most oftentimes, I'm not, because I want everything to be adjusted level, and it usually doesn't come out right. But my friend, Gary Tyreman, who is actually the guy who just does all the alignments on my cars, a master in his own right, pure genius, is able to dial in the cars the way that I want. So a lot of people talk to me about being a race car driver, or that I was a race car driver. So what's the key? Typically, as most of you know, you have to adapt the car you're driving. The greatest thing ever is when the person setting up the chassis can make the car handle the way you drive. So Gary is able to induce oversteer, snap, oversteer, understeer. Whatever I tell him is very responsive. Flattening out the car, making the car bite when I need more coming out of the turn. He just really does the job. And he's done the job on all my cars. But luckily this time I asked him for a favor. He uses what's called grease plates. I don't know if any of you are familiar with that, but what they are is, bottom line is, there are 2 plates that go under your tire that have grease in between, and they move very easily. The reason for these are, when you come down on the lift, the suspension actually can move where it wants to, and you don't have to take it out and drive it or push it around then come back to the lift. It saves enormous amounts of time. And usually Gary's busy using his, and I hate to take him because that's his livelihood, where I'm just screwing around with my cars. But this time I was able to borrow them. So you could take a look at them and see what I'm talking about. Right there are the metal solid plates, and you can see the grease surface right there. Now, that allows the car and the suspension to unload and get you right ride height, making things much faster. So now that we're down below, I'll need to raise it up, get lumber under there to support the grease plates, put it down, and see where we're at. If you have your own or have access to the grease plates, they work amazing. Save a ton of time. So the Murci is so low that actually I need lumber underneath it. So the key, of course, is to get it off of the lift arm so it's supporting its own weight. So you can see right here, down below, I use lumber. And right there are the grease plates, and they slide as it comes down on the lift. That's what gives me the actual ride height. Okay? So let's take a look back here. You can see how I did it on the rear. Same process. Although, you can't see as much of the grease plate. That's why I showed the front first. And that, of course, is because the rear tire is so wide. But everything is looking good. I was able to square off the rear, but of course the front still needs to be lowered because I need my spanner tool. But at least for now, the rear is done. As all of you know, I'm very impatient. So early this morning, I contacted my good friend, Gary Tyreman, and luckily, look what he had for me. The pin spanner wrench that I needed. His was 1/4 inch pin. Had to turn it down a bit to make it work, but now we can adjust the front suspension. First thing I always do is index everything. You'd be surprised how easy it is to get confused as what's going on. Red Sharpie does the job. Again, if you can line up the spanner wrenches as a grip to break it free, life becomes a lot easier. You can see there the lock is loose, spin it down. Then of course you could see that pin wrench locked into the body, and then you can use your spanner to lower it. Once it's down, then go ahead and bring the lock back up and bring it in and lock it down with 2 spanners. You can see there's not a lot of adjustment left there. I moved the perch down 2 turns on the driver's side and 3 turns on the passenger side to equal out the difference. Well, as all of you saw, that went fairly smooth. Again, without the spanner wrench, pretty difficult. Maybe you can figure out a way to do it, but that made life a whole lot easier. Total was 2 turns down on this side, the driver, 3 turns down on the passenger. Now we can put the wheels and tires on and see if everything equals out. All right, the Murci is back down now on the grease plates, so I can check the front too. Just looking at the fender gap and everything, quite pleased with the way everything looks. So I'll just have to make some minor tweaks and then bring it all the way down. Well, after all that work on the Murci, it's time for a little field trip. Now, you all know that I often talk about my good friend Gary Tyreman, who's been with me for a very long time and known me since I was small. I literally trust my life with him. All of you that saw the 7 running the 8s, well, you can also thank him because he adjusted all the suspension geometry to get that car to hook so well. And of course, I trust him with all my supercars. So after lowering the Murci, I came here to his shop and he's working his magic. The problem is that Gary is much smarter than me. And when he talks to me, I only obtain like a little bit of that information. But the bottom line is what I can tell you is that whenever you have your car and you want it to handle a different way, you want a good suspension alignment guy. It's amazing. They can change the characteristics of any car. Most of my cars, some of them have been quite unmanageable. And after I explained to him what's going on, he's been able to fix the problems for me and made everything much more balanced and easier to drive. I've heard from other people that they have lowered their Murci and they didn't need alignment. They are obviously a lot luckier than I am because once my Murci was lowered and I brought it to Gary, I found out it was quite a bit out. So it took him quite a bit of time to get everything dialed in, and of course I added more work to his load because I wanted to have tweaks done to satisfy my driving style. There's a nice shot of Gary's computer indicating how far out the Murci actually was. Every time when I come visit Gary, I learn a whole bunch. I mean, from everything from changing the toe to how the car responds to snap oversteer. It's always just a wealth of knowledge, but today I learned something even more interesting, and that is, he was telling me that when I'm looking for some of my cars, because as most of you know, I don't buy all of them new, I'm always wondering if something has happened to them, always concerned. And all of you that are experienced know that Carfax and AutoCheck, that's only good if things have been reported. The good thing is that actually Gary can tell a lot of what's been going on with the car by the adjustments of the suspension. Something you might keep in mind. Now, usually a good shop that does a PPI would probably pick up on this. If they're not experienced, it might be a good idea to have somebody who knows a lot about alignment and suspension take a look at it. One thing about the Murci is it has cams for adjusting all the alignment, which I like a lot. A lot of the other cars have shims, which is great, but if you want to do the job right, that means you have to order the shims most of the time from the dealer so you have the exact fit. This is nice. Of course, Gary reminded me that the downside is with the cams, if I'm unlucky enough to hit something hard enough, I'll knock it out of alignment. All right, well, all finished, and I am quite pleased. It came out better than I thought it would. Some things to look at. First of all, let's take a step back here and look at the Murci. I did measure everything out so it is even between the rim lip and the fender. But most importantly, I will say, always look with your eyes because sometimes things are deceiving. And a good case in point being is the rear. The rear is the same as the front, but you'll see because of the wheel well design in the front at about 11 o'clock, it looks really tight. But when you measure at 12, it's the same. So now what's the important part? The front wheel wells are even. So taking a step back, the key is that everything looks squared up. And to me, that looks square. Now, what I'll say about that is, could I go lower? Yes, I'm almost out of adjustment in the front. But be honest with you, I really use like the 2-finger rule for cars and other things at that. But the main thing is that anything below 2 fingers, typically what will happen is that I won't clear. I'll have a clearance problem. So if you look at it there, 2 fingers in the front, 2 fingers in the rear is about the lowest I will go. If you wanted to, you could probably pull out another 1/4 inch, which probably some of you want to. But I'll say this, I didn't put it on the video, but I did actually drop the rear because there was more adjustment, lower, and it started to not look good. I'll tell you why. If you look around the wheel well, it looks pretty even with the tight spot at around 11 o'clock. But the problem is that as you lower it more, it starts to look really weird. Like you start to get a very large gap here in proportion. So I felt that's about as low as I could go on the rear. So I just made the front even. Now, a lot of you like to dump them completely. Hey, that's great. I love that. But this is where my age shows. I used to love that type of stuff when I was younger, but now I really don't like wiping out my front nose. And those of you that are familiar with these cars, some of the newer ones, like the SV back there, their hydraulic lift does work a hell of a lot faster, but the Murci is fairly slow. So even with the quick reaction time to that button, she doesn't come up fast enough sometimes. And there are things that come up like steep driveways to get feel of all things. those are just things that I will point out. Now, talking about upgrades, cost effectiveness, well, this is a great upgrade because it doesn't cost very much. But the key is, because it comes with coilover suspension, if it just has regular shocks with a coilover spring, and then you're gonna change to coilover adjustables, or you're gonna use lowering springs, obviously that becomes a major expense in comparison. And actually, myself, I hate dealing with regular springs. But on the Murci, I mean, it makes a big difference in visual appearance. If you like that, yes, the ride is not quite as good, but the difference is marginal. I don't think it's a deal breaker. But the best thing is, if you're gonna do it, at least on the Murci, tie it into when you're getting new tires, because you should get an alignment anyways when you're getting new tires. I think a new set of rubbers just for the rear of the Murci is around $1,000. And I don't even know what the fronts are, to be honest with you. But for the amount that it costs to get a good alignment, the benefits are huge. But if you tie it into when you're actually lowering it anyway, then maybe that's one less time you have to align the car. The tools, minimal. The job, not too hard. I'm pretty confident all of you could handle it. Other than that, it's a real good deal. A few things to keep in mind if you're considering doing it. Any good chassis builder will tell you that the car actually will perform better at its stock ride height, because the geometry set up by the factory just performs better. I'm not doing back-to-back tests, but that definitely does make sense. So there is a trade-off there. I know someone's gonna argue that, oh wait, but it's lower center of gravity. I do agree with that. But in the end game, suspension geometry is key, because that's the way the car is gonna handle. Now, the nice thing is that you do have adjustability through your chassis tuner, and most of us, like me, are gonna change things up anyway. So I don't know how much that really matters, but it's something to consider. And when I say that, it's because of the SV. Some of my friends actually have told me that they don't like the way the SV looks because I need to lower the ride height. To each their own is what I say. For me, I like the height the way it is. It doesn't really bother me. I'm not one of those guys that has to have everything slammed. Now, talk to the me 25 years ago, you probably get a different answer. But as time progresses on, I really just don't like dealing with all the problems and headaches that come with that. Most likely in the future, I will lower it, but the perfect time to do it is when I get new tires. That wheel gap really doesn't bother me, but to some, it is just a deal breaker. You can definitely see the resemblance of the wheel well shape to the Murci. Just a quick side note for those of you that hung out, I'm sorry, that looks like the 7 under that cover, and gee, could that be straps tying it down to the dyno? I don't know, maybe something to come. The bottom line is, would I recommend doing it if you have a Murci? Undoubtedly. For the look alone, it's worth it. On that note, I'm gonna take off and go take a ride in the Murci, and you guys all have a great weekend.